You're listening to Titular Characters with your host, the adorable Eva Webb.
Let's talk nerdy things like comic books and superheroes with some nerdy peeps, writers, cartoonists, and so much more. Stick around and have some fun with the lovely and adorable Eva Webb.
Mark Bernal grew up in Oakland, California, and spent 17 years serving the Department of Defense. During 2020, he began working with various illustrators to create the first pages of lesser-known comics. Since then, Lesser Known Comics has grown to a 14-person company working with talent spanning the entire globe. The company's goal is to make better comics and strive to drive industry standards and ethics reforms. In March 2021, Lesser Known Comics began releasing its first comic books, available for download at lesserknowncomics.com. The first issues are available at your local comic book shop today. All right, so let's start at the beginning. What is your origin story?
Most of my origin story, as it relates to comic books, I was a big fan of comic books growing up, but not a lot of money growing up, and so most of my comic book experience was, like a lot of your previous guests, talked about watching X-Men the animated series, or watching Spider-Man, and then trying to pester their parents to get some comic books here and there, as they kind of in the 90s we're all over things like grocery stores and toy stores as well, and here and there, like they carried the Watchmen in the local library growing up, but I was too young to understand much of that book. But then 2020, like everybody else, got a lot of time to reevaluate my life decisions and see what I wanted to do with my life. And just felt like I needed that creative outlet. When I was 17 or 18, actually from the time 15 to 18, I played a lot of music. But then I joined the Army, and I did that for about 17 years. So after that, wanted to get back into doing something creative. So, okay, maybe I'll make a graphic novel, and started working with some illustrators who I was blessed enough for them to tell me, hey, have you ever made a comic before? And I no. Okay, well then we're not doing a graphic novel. And since then, we've been doing mini comics, and we have the first 2 that were published, and then we have 5 more in the works. But somewhere in that process, it went from about making a comic book or telling one individual story into more of building a company. One of the illustrators I work with, Katie Drinkwine, she told me this story of how she worked so hard to get what she thought was her dream job as an illustrator, and what working conditions in the industry are kind of like, both as a way to make a living, but also just be treated like a human. And I just felt this urge to do something more with the comic books. And since then we've brought on 6 more illustrators, and this thing is kind of spiraled out of control. So we're doing a lot, and we're producing a lot of comic books. And I've been blessed as well to have some amazing mentors with a lot more experience than me, telling me how to do this right. 1 from a company standpoint, and 2 from how to treat artists the right way.
So you're actually writing these books, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
That's correct. We do have a couple of writers on the team besides myself that have So the majority of characters, within our lesser known universe is were created by me, but a couple of them, some of the illustrators came in that do some of their own writing, or illustrator writer team that said, hey, can we publish through you? And so there's a couple of, I guess, that would be closer to that, that Alterna model where it's, the creator owned comics. But the majority of what we do, I'm writing the majority of that script. We started really going public with promotion actually around February 3rd, because we've been very careful about tracking metrics and all that fun stuff, to see hey, can we put together a comic book company that produces indie comics that operates very differently from industry standards. So one of the main differences, one of our first illustrators came to me when we were first negotiating rates, and he said, well, here's the graphic artist or graphic illustrator guild guide for code of ethics, and it talked about what reasonably illustrators should be paid for page and panels and things like that. And we had an amazing conversation of just I said, do you like this? Like, as a person used to write songs, I couldn't imagine operating this way. If someone said, hey, I'm going to pay you per song you write, and expect that to be done on a deadline. Some songs are better than others, and some songs, take forever to get done, and some are done overnight, and there's no real rhyme or reason. It's so inspiration based. So as a company, we started building a mission statement together with the illustrators, say, well, like, how do you want to operate? And we ended up landing on flat rate type of agreements, where they could just tell me like, hey, I'm not feeling the buzz today. Like, I'm going to go out. One of our artists said, oh, I'm gonna go for a hike today because I'm not feeling it. And she came back the next day, totally recharged, and cranked out some amazing art. One of our artists is a surfer. It's like, you can't predict when the waves are going to hit. So, hey, if you got a good day to do, to get out surfing, like, you should be doing that instead of doing art. So we really took a different approach for that. And I think I get more value out of it as a publisher. And I think that the illustrators appreciate, not being treated like, like a robot that's going to, hey, not only do I want you to be creative, but I want you to be creative within very specific parameters.
I think that's probably the number one complaint that I hear from comic book artists.
Yeah, and I think that's been the one thing as we pull people in for the business aspect of it. So whether it's someone who's going to help as a business analyst, or somebody who's coming in as a potential investor, which we have a number of, which is that's kind of the first thing we needed to get them on board with first. Is we can't be put in a position where we make decisions and the artist is treated just like just a line item on a budget. I think the last 4 years and certainly since the pandemic, I think we've seen some stark realities about the status of capitalism, and the status of how we treat each other as humans, and how we quantify that value. I think businesses came face to face with the reality of hey, oh wow, there's kids in the background of all these Zoom phone calls that we're doing for work, and people have lives of their own that are outside of their job and how they earn, and that needs to be respected. And that's the type of thing that, we're just trying to prioritize. And I think once you treat people like humans, they're just capable of so many amazing things.
Yeah, that's really true. That's really true. So as far as writing, um, do you have a ritual, something you do to get yourself into the mood where you're going to be more creative?
I wish I had a better answer for that. So when I don't know if other writers have, experienced this. The it I've never really found it, okay, if I carve out this time that, I'm going to be, productive in writing. And then I got, I read Stephen King's memoir, on writing. There's a lot of helpful things in there, but frankly, most of the time my best stuff comes as I say, oh my gosh, I got to pull this car over because I have the idea and I'm writing it on, just in the note app, on my iPhone. And then I get home and I type it up and clean it up, and whatnot. I think the most value in brainstorming seems to come with riffing with the other writers. We're putting together a Halloween special, and one of the other writers and I, we said, maybe we do a black, white, and an orange, comic for Halloween, and that'd be fun. So what fun things can we do? And me and her just back and forth, we started talking about, what if it's a candy store heist? And then we started talking about the movie Point Break, where they do the bank, the famous bank robbery scene. We said, if we do black, white, and orange, and we do new presidents' faces, on the masks, like they did in the movie. Well, we got the standout orange, for for this panel, with the one kid that'll be wearing, the Trump mask. And, we're just having a good time and laughing and coming up with these insane, scenarios for, some funny comics, and that's rewarding. And that's how I lose a whole afternoon, where my wife will come knock on the door. She's like, what have you been on the phone for, 3 hours? I'm like, oh yeah, I've been talking to other comic book writers. It's a pretty good time, and you lose track of time pretty quickly when you do that.
It's great, just the way that leads into my next scripted question, which was how important is collaboration in your workflow, and how do you make great collaborations happen?
I think the smartest thing we ever did was, and it wasn't my idea, I just happened to read that Seven Habits for Highly Effective People book. And it, talked about, hey, anything you do, you got to make a mission statement. You got to bring everybody in, and you need to write it together as an organization, because you'll just be so much stronger. That was probably the best advice, and it gave us such a solid foundation. Because, I have the mission statement, here in front of me. But one of the lines that was really important to everybody who's in lesser known comics, and there's 14 of us total actually right now, is perspective, and we all bring very unique perspectives in. The writer I was talking about, it's nice to have a female writer to kind of bounce ideas off of, because we have, we see the world, very, very differently, just based on experiences. I'm originally from California. One of the other writers, he's from New York, so we joke and talk differently, and something that seems just so mundane to him, may just crack me up, because, it's an idiom or a joke or something that, is so day to day for somebody from New York, but from somebody from California, it's just absolutely hilarious, or vice versa. So, with most things in life, you do yourself a tremendous service, if you just surround yourself with people who don't look and think like you. That tends to, good things tend to work out if you do those things.
It's interesting, because one question I like to ask way later in the interview normally is, how do you approach diversity and representation? But this time it sounds like it's really sort of baked into your foundation.
I've I've been lucky with the fact that, 17 years in the Army, that's quite the little social experiment that you get into. And what you have to learn really quickly is, just because you can vehemently disagree with somebody doesn't really change the fact that your life kind of depends on them, key moments. There's, people that I know that, oh my goodness, the way we argue, about politics or this, that, and the other thing, you would think we were worst enemies, but you trust people like that in your darkest hours sometime. And I wish that was an experience that more people have, because you kind of learn what stuff is just noise and what stuff is what's important. And I wasn't always that, I didn't always get that. I think we're all guilty sometimes of classifying people who think differently as the other, but we're all just trying to do the best we can for the most part. And we just land in very different places. So I try and keep that perspective, and luckily I have some people, that are close to me who give me some very candid feedback that helps, keep me, a little more grounded than I would be on my own. I'm finding, and I'm not sure if everyone else is getting this, but we all got a little bit more zen, almost as a function of self-preservation. In 2020, I find people using the same language that all sounds very I'm gonna have to figure out a way, to not be overwhelmed by all this, oversaturation of stimulus, and how to get along with the people around me, just because we're all stuck inside, for better for worse, with the people we were.
So when you produce comics, do you think more in terms of paper or digital, or are there special considerations for either one? How do you approach that?
Yeah, so comics are interesting. Yeah, in the fact that comic books do something that no other medium does, where you have that opportunity to startle the reader when you turn the page. That big flashy turn page reveal, where the monster that's lurking behind the corner is literally behind the page, putting that cliffhanger in the bottom right hand corner, where it's just the reader has no choice but to turn the page. And that's something I don't think you can get so much in novels, certainly not to the point where once you turn the page you literally jump. Movies will set the pace themselves, and you're not really in control of that. But comic books are the only one where, as you're holding it, you can experience something different than any other medium. So I think we write everything and we edit everything in the intention to have, what does that turn page reveal look like, and what do those two pages look like next to each other? We do have both digital and physical copies of our comics, but yeah, we certainly place what is the physical copy going to feel like ahead of anything else.
So when you have yourself and other people writing stories, how does the plotting work? Is it the kind of thing where everything is architected down to the last detail? Or is it one of those deals where writers just go off and do their own thing?
So one of the pieces I took of advice from, and I might not even understood the advice, exactly how he was trying to convey it, but in that, Stephen, King memoir, he talked about not having that whole story worked out to the end, or at least allowing some wiggle room where you as the writer can say, man, I really hope it works out for these characters, because if you're compelled to root for them, or to be worried about them, then, the reader will feel that too. So certainly, our plots are character driven. Let's take characters and put them in these situations. Let's just see what happens. So I think keeping with the characters, and then, there's certainly themes that I gravitate to, and I think that the other writers gravitate to. A lot of counterculture themes, and a lot of things having to do with, people who are typically written off. And I think I tried to capture that in the lesser known comics. So this is all. We don't really do a whole lot of saving the world, or saving the galaxy, or superhero. It's mostly band of misfits type of stories that we take on. And yeah, when we riff, I've had a story arc completely change. Just because another writer had a better suggestion. You say, well, wouldn't it be more interesting if they did this? And that's been the most entertaining part for me. We actually had an idea of a writer who had a character from her own indie comics, and we said, oh, let's do just like a crossover where one of my characters basically goes on like a spring break like type of bender, and we'll date your character like for a summer, and we'll make that a mini comic, and we'll just have some fun with it. And we ended up just spending out just being like, well, whose fault was the breakup? So like just in our like arguing, going back and forth with that, we were having so much fun, just kind of working out those details. We were like, oh, I think we have something that will go a lot longer. And I don't think that story ended up anywhere near where either of us thought it was originally going to go. So I've tend to not really try and keep too close a tabs on, where I want a story to go, rather than, where it naturally leads, based on the people who are working on it.
So where do you start when you do world building?
We ended up with a main character lead who was not intended on being the main character lead. So when I started writing the graphic novel, I had this idea where, okay, there's this guy and he takes these psychedelic mushrooms, and he, basically goes on a spirit quest, with this, he meets this, this bruja, this, Latina witch that's going to take him on this spirit journey, and I ended up asking a lot more questions about, well, like, how do you become like a spirit guide? Like what was going on with this lady before all this happened? So as we kind of built out the world, I found her story to be a lot more compelling. And I found the attributes that I was ascribing to her to be really reflective of a lot of the women in my life, friends, and a lot of the things that, my wife says or does. So this character just really kind of stole the show. And now we're, she's the central arc of our universe. So we have this lady she's perpetually, 28 because she's practicing witchcraft, but she's actually really 150 years old. And she's basically over the last 150 years has, lived this rich storied life that, would be similar to what, any of us would probably do. And if we had the ability to cast spells and curses to do whatever, we desire. So she gets herself in some trouble. She doesn't read all the fine print, on the spells. She makes some enemies. She makes some friends. She makes some money. She travels to exotic places. So she's got a whole backstory, almost similar to, like one of your guests, I actually was Eric Larson, was talking about, Wolverine, Wolverine always knows somebody, when he gets introduced, because he's got this long history. So she's kind of got something similar to that going on, where she's been everywhere and seen everything. And that gives us the opportunity to have all our artists draw that same character in different styles and in different eras, and do different types of genres. So we can do a horror story, or we can do a comedy, or we can do this, that, or the other thing. And then tying those together can be really fun to have the illustrators take on story arcs that will overlap from different perspectives. So both her and the supporting characters are able to be drawn in various different ways by the illustrators from different vantage points. When we do our everything right now is kind of geared towards so we have these mini 5 to 9 page comics that we're doing through the summer, and then everything's going to culminate in a big crossover around Halloween, because Halloween's fun and spooky. But those will give the artists a chance to actually have all their story arcs finally culminate in one place, and they'll actually have scenes that'll overlap in multiple separate comics, where scenes will be done in one style in one issue and done in a different style in another.
So what are some of the challenges that come along with building a shared universe?
Yeah, so it's certainly a lot to keep track of, but I think some of the plot devices that we have make it a little easier. One, because we're not doing a lot of science fiction type of things outside of the witchcraft. So witchcraft, if I have any questions, I actually just refer to I have a book on witchcraft and the occult and the history of magic, so I just look at, okay, well, what would somebody use in this part of the world as a spell, and how would they try and do something like that. So maybe we exaggerate the effectiveness of that spell or that curse, but a lot of that is culturally or historically accurate. So a lot of the events and a lot of the things like that are based in real life or near real life. So we're doing a bar scene in the UK in the 80s, so the characters in there feel very like punk rock 80s, so the type of things that happen are pretty accurate to the time period, and we can just take some creative liberties on well, yeah, these people maybe not know each other, or these areas may not exactly overlap, but makes for a better comic book. But I think the fact that our universe is based so closely in real world, then it with just these touches of magic, it makes it very easy to world build.
Is there a particular type of story that you're looking to tell as a comic book publisher?
Yeah, I think so we do have two outside writers that they have their own themes that are separate from all the stories that I'm writing. One of them, Patrick Hickey Jr., he's doing story. His character in this series is called Condry, and it's essentially somebody who's been thrown out by society type of story. It's crime noir, but there's a lot to do with the redemption arc, and it's something that I always appreciated. So it's close to some of the same themes. Charlotte Andrus. She goes by Charlie. She does more of like a campy zine type of story arc. She does very funny stories that take on, some pretty relevant social issues. So we're working on a series called so I worked at the mall, and it's essentially, it's essentially a comedy, but it covers those things like, hey, what is it like for a young female to work at a mall, and have that creepy manager that's, always saying and doing inappropriate things, or, dealing with working, minimum wage and things like that. But, she just does it in a fun way that engages the reader, but still tells the, the reality. And I think with mine and my stories and in my universe, I think the magic is fun. The witchcraft is fun. It tells a little bit, gives a little sense of culture, but it also, keeps the reader engaged. But at the end of the day, a lot of these stories are simply about relationships. Somebody who is, I've just like the main character in most of ours, where we have this person who has this, she's traveled a lot and she's met these people who come in and out of her life, and that's similar to, a lot of experience that myself and others have had, where they have these relationships and they go through these very, harrowing and intense bonding, experiences, and then it's over, right? And you go on to another part of your life. But telling those stories about, the importance of those relationships at those periods, I think that's the part that people will be able to relate to.
Okay, so in your view, what makes a comic book exciting or compelling? What makes somebody want to invest time in one of your comics?
I think that relationship building where, our main protagonist, she has a male sidekick where, they go on these adventures together, and, they make a really good team, but they also hurt each other, and let each other down. And, I think as a reader, you see those kind of stories, and I think those are really relatable to, relationships that we may have in our own lives, and you want it to work out for these people, or maybe certain characters come around that you're just like, oh man, like this person's nothing but trouble, and I don't know why, but I really hope, this character I like starts making better decisions and hanging out with better influences, and we all experience that in our life. And we try and tell those stories, a little bit more creatively, in the fact that, we're able to use witchcraft and magic as an analogy. But I think, stories come down to a real human experience at the end of the day.
So what's your goal with lesser known comics? What are you planning to accomplish with it?
That question has definitely changed. I initially started this to make a specific comic, to tell a specific story. And that story was going to have a beginning or an ending. And, I laugh and joke with my friends because, when you tell your wife, hey, I'm going to make a comic book, she's okay, that's great. I support you, honey. Let's, go ahead and make a comic book. When you tell your wife, hey, I'm going to start a comic book company. Okay. That's probably, it's not in the top 10 things that she wants to hear, like when she's pregnant with the second baby. Right. And then at that point, I don't know, we joke, it's like, would it be better if this thing was going poorly and this was going to fizzle out by the end of 2021, or is it actually worse that it's going so well for us? Our by virtue of a lot of our message of how we want to treat artists and the type of relationship and workspace we want to create for artists, the response has been just so overwhelming, and so it's almost like, oh crap, we might actually pull this off. So so now it went from Mark's making a comic book to Mark's making a comic book company to Mark's actually gonna maybe actually do this for quite a while. So that being said, we the illustrators and I and the writers and the rest of the folks, because we have some graphic designers who are on the team. We got folks that, do photography and things like that, and, help us with our website. We talked about that goal. So it instead of just being about making a certain comic to, a certain level of quality, which is, obviously, we want to make work that we're proud of. But we also talk a lot about, how do we change those industry standards, so that, we can change the thinking of how artists and are treated, because the truth is, as nice as it is to have artists reach out to me and say, oh my gosh, this is so great that somebody wants to treat artists like humans, it's also at the same time sad, and my bigger wish would be that like a bigger company would say, oh yeah, like we want to do those policies too, but it's just not out there. And this as soon as a larger company, does that, I would be the first one to welcome it. I hope they do it, and I hope they drive me out of business. And until they do, we'll just keep doing what we're doing. So at the end of the day, yeah, changing industry standards for how artists are treated, is almost just as important. And in many ways more important than the comic books we make.
So are you still actively reading comics?
Yeah. So I stumbled across somebody's blog where they listed all the Marvel all the X-Men comics in chronological order, and I was always an X-Men fan growing up. So I've been reading and rereading, a lot from the X-Men series, so I can do it in timeline order. So that includes, the Excalibur and X Factor and X Force and a lot of the, the stuff that branches off. So that's my nerd journey right now is rediscovering some of those story arcs, and then discovering some that I never knew existed, or just simply weren't around. I read Ed Piskor's, he did the X-Men Grand Design, and that was probably what was like, oh man, this is what it's all about. Like, it was, an overview of, everything that's happened pretty much in like that mutant timeline. And I was just, I fell in love with that, that book. And I was like, okay, I guess I have to read everything from front to back,
It's a great book.
From the I tell everybody, I'm like, all my friends, that I was like, oh, have you read this yet? Or have you seen this? And anyone that says no, I'm like, oh, like if I like buy it now, if you don't like it, I will reimburse you, but I know you're going to love this.
That's awesome. So what are you reading right now?
I started getting into which kind of caught me by surprise is the Excalibur series, because I didn't really care about those characters, growing, when I was younger, I was like, who are these people, and so, haven't gotten too deep into it, and I haven't been doing as much reading as I want, because I've been, just so busy. But that's the one that kind of gave me pause. Like, I'm like, oh man, like, how did I miss how good this series and I don't know, it kind of reminds me a little bit like it's almost like, X-Men meets Riverdale in some some ways, of like how, how the interpersonal drama kind of goes, and the type of humor that they have.
So, in your opinion, who is the most underrated or, excuse me, let me try that again. Okay, so in your opinion, who is the most underrated or inspiring comics creator you can think of?
That's a good question. That's pretty hard. I I think I tend, so my temptation right now is to give, to give some obscure indie comic creator, because there's so many that I come across right now where um everything that they say, I find hilarious. So one of them, for example, there's a guy in Georgia, Justin. He does Mind Invader comics, and he was telling me, so his comics is called Mind Invader. Marietta, Georgia has a giant chicken like building, like a chicken shaped building that's like a chicken shack type, fast food place. And he's created this story about, you know, what if a giant chicken, like that building, like ran amok in Marietta, Georgia. And then, he ended up, saying, oh, hey, wow, there's actually a toy store on the other side of town, and it's got a gorilla as its mascot. And what if that thing came to life, and it's, wreaking havoc across Marietta, Georgia. And he just happened to be, telling me, he's either releasing it, or just released it, or it's about to come out, that story. Yeah, I lost the whole afternoon just being like, tell me more, man. Like everything about that story, was just so good. And hearing that passion of like, hey, let's just make a comic book that's just really fun and really local, that everybody from where I live is going to absolutely love it, because they can point to things, that are in the comic book around their town. So, um, that's the kind of stuff that like really, really motivates me, when you go to, the classics, I mean, I grew up on stuff like, that Chris Claremont was making, but, that's not the stuff I'm writing now. So it's not really the same stuff that's, that I guess I'm getting inspired by day to day.
Nice. So, are you ready for the fun and silly questions?
Absolutely. Let's do
Awesome.
this.
Awesome. I love that answer. Um, so, what's your favorite food?
Favorite food. So I'm from California. So my favorite food is In-N-Out Burger. Um, and I'll eat it literally every day when I'm visiting California. So I'm in California for 7 days. I'm at least eating it 7 times, and not uncommon to 9 or 10.
Nice. Nice. Would you say you're a cat or a dog person?
I am hugely allergic to cats, even though I love them. So the second I touch them, my eyes just swell up. So by default, I'm a dog person. But on that note, I was always a small dog person, until I met my wife, and she had a 90-pound bulldog. Um, so it was, I learned to love big dogs very quickly.
What's the best swear word?
You know, uh, I mean, fuck has such, it's just so versatile. But I think a well-timed, um safe swear word, like, I've heard someone be called a poo head, in a very tense situation. And I thought it was artistically well done,
That is good. One of my standbys for that is calling people duty heads, you know? Yeah. So what brings you joy?
I think for me, I I really appreciate, humor, and observational humor. I'm the kind of person who can watch, a stand-up comedy special of the same person, 4 or 5 times in a row. And anybody who's able to take a step back and point out the absurdity of life, um, I they do wonders for my soul, to just remind us all that, like, hey, stop taking yourself so seriously.
So if you could change one detail about life on planet Earth today, uh, what would it be and where would you start?
Gosh, I want to give you like a real selfish answer, because like something like, I want to eat all the food that I can, without having to worry about the consequences. But I feel that's not the right answer nowadays, with so much so much attention on larger issues. Do you want the real one, or do you want the less selfish version?
Yeah, no, whatever you got.
Oh gosh.
So that's your answer
Yeah.
then? You know, eat all the food?
That's my selfish answer. I don't know. I could probably get you a more altruistic one. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Everything that comes to mind has to do with either food or sleep. It's like, I want to feel rested without actually having to go to sleep at the end of the day,
Yeah, that would be great.
or,
Okay. So you wake up one morning and you're imbued with superpowers. What are those powers and how do you use them?
oh, that's a good one. I've always thought that the ability to stop time was the ultimate power. I still think it is. Yeah. So that would certainly be it. Um, and I think I would just be that person who stopped time and just learn everything there is to know about anything. And try and make sure that, when I press play on life, that, I'm stepping off with the right information. But, I think also, there may be a curse that lies in there, where you never feel ready to press play on life. And the more you know, the more you realize that you're not prepared. So, yeah, curse and all, though, I'd probably still take a pausing time, being able to control time.
Do you see yourself as a hero or a villain or an anti-hero or even somebody not especially heroic?
Yeah, that's, I certainly try and be somebody that people feel like, oh, on a whole, like, hey, it's good that Mark's around. But yeah, certainly also, realize that, it's hard to do things and try and do anything that's big or of consequence, and not, have some unintended consequences, and where other people might see your actions, differently. So certainly try and do the right thing. But I'm sure some people will say, oh yeah, that Mark, he's a bit much. Or
So what's next for Mark Bernal?
So yeah, next for us, well, for me, right, is we have 2021 as being the year of giving away free comics. Our whole business model is based on, okay, let's give away as many comics as possible, grow that readership, And if we can survive to 2022, then we'll turn around and, start doing things to be a sustainable, company in the long term. So a lot of this, for me is implementing that plan. There's a lot of fun things ahead. Like, we're doing a lot of straight to comic book stores. We actually have a no Amazon pledge, where I would rather give a reader a free comic book. I'd rather have them send it will call to a comic book store than than have them order it through Amazon. And that, it's not a knock on Amazon, or it's not a knock on, distributors who use them. But to me, the unintended consequence of all this online distribution is that these comic book stores, they're not going to survive it. And unfortunately, that means that we're not going to have places to do, book signings, and we're not going to have places to go, see an artist in person, just at the local comic book store and get, cool sketch covers and stuff like that. So, in an effort to do that, we're actually got some road trips planned, and we're going to be visiting, hundreds of comic book stores across the country, and try and build those relationships. I'm excited just to travel across the country and do that. I think that's going to be, hugely rewarding, just to meet all these, people who are running comic book shops and see the country. And that's what I'm like waiting for. And, at every night, like thinking like a kid, on Christmas Eve, just being like, oh man, this is going to be great. And texting friends at all hours of the night, saying, oh man, can't wait for these, these vaccines to come in so that, we can get on the road and do this fun stuff. So, I think that's with regard to comics, what's next for me. And then figuring out how to do this with two daughters will be an interesting challenge and adventure.
And that's it, my babies. It's time to close the show. I wanted to thank you for being gorgeous, being valid, and living your best life. We couldn't do this show without you, and I appreciate you. This episode has been part of Batch 35. Oh, the show's Twitter profile, @TitularPod, is under new management this week, and I wanted to mention it. The profile is being run by my friend Sparky, an actual social media goblin who lives under my bed and works for cheese. Sparky's pronouns are they, them. Titular Characters is a show about the things we love. It's produced and hosted by the adorable Eva Webb. That's me. Opening theme by Antonia Marquis. Closing theme by Mikey Flash of Speed Force Music. The dreamy announcer guy is Donnie Underwood, and he's pretty awesome. So have you put much thought into supporting the show? There are tons of ways to do it. You can show your support by following me @EvaIsAdorable on Twitter, leaving us a review at Apple Podcasts, CastBox, or Podchaser. And if you're feeling like you want to help out financially, you can visit us at buymeacoffee.com/EvaIsAdorable, because I am. There you can donate as little as $1, and all proceeds go towards the costs of producing and hosting this show. Every little bit helps, and you are amazing for even considering it. Anyway, darlings, that's all we got. Join us next time for another death-defying adventure in cyberspace. Oh, and when you do, bring candy. Love yous.